My guest today is Emmanuel from Bocuma Synth, and we're talking about being agile and working on small parts of synthesizers that you really want to build to realize a grand vision in the future. Just imagine that you would want to build something like the, I don't know, Mini Moog. That's quite a crazy and ambitious challenge to take on yourself, especially if you're working from home. And so what Emmanuel is doing is like, I want to get there, but before I can actually realize something so big, I should maybe start just building something small. So what about just creating a small controller? Or maybe a VCO or a VCF, like a filter. And by doing these, I can test them out, I can learn through the process, and I can bring them to the market. So people who love what I do can support my future vision that I am going to realize in some time. And so the conversation goes into the challenges that one can take when they just work from home and want to learn how to become a professional manufacturer of synthesizers like Arturia or Moog or Make Noise or all the other companies we're interviewing here. So I think it's a very interesting conversation for anyone who is in this space of like, I'm maybe a sound engineer or maybe a musician and I want to build my own musical instruments. And how do I do that? Where do I start? Without further ado, this is Emmanuel from Bocuma Synth. I'm Roy, Synth.academy, and this is the Synth Design Podcast.
I got into Eurorack designs because they're not, there's no one in Mexico doing them at the moment, I don't think. So a lot of people were asking them, asking me about, hey, are you doing Eurorack soon? Is there anything coming up on that sense? So I thought I'll give it a shot. And also because it's so modular and it's so easy to combine into other designs. My idea in the future, I want to design like a semi-modular desktop synth with, like a user-centric approach. So I thought I'll give it a go. And then, so I'm designing modules and then putting just modules out there for the people that are starting to use Eurorack here in Mexico. But price point is always an issue for someone who wants to get into Eurorack here in the country. So you have to get them from the States or from Europe. So you end up paying like taxes, shipping and all that. So at the moment, it's still like a hobby or a luxury that just a few can afford. So I'm trying to change that a little bit and just offering options to the people that are following my brand already. And
right.
So yeah, that's basically the logic behind doing Eurorack synths at the moment, right?
Yeah,
just
.vco.
Yeah, and it's a great learning opportunity as well. So
yeah, definitely. But before that, you actually did you designed the compass.
Oh yeah, I actually have the prototypes here. I'll share some pictures in a moment if you want.
Yeah.
But yeah, that was like my first sort of like approach into tactile interfaces and different ways of interfacing with a synth. So I started working on Compass before then. My first design was a very, very simple, DIY synth kit that I sell to people wanting to do the same thing. So it's called Frankie. It's based on Frankenstein, and it's everything. It's out in the open for you to learn and assemble and just play around with it. And it's like a way of seeing if you get beaten by the bug of synthesis and electronics, right? So
yeah,
it's a popular product. I tried to sort of like discontinue it because it was taking a lot of my time, but people just kept asking for it, and I was like, it's a good way of making money and keeping things rolling. So at the end of the day, I work for the user, right? I mean, I do have my interests and my inclinations, but at the end of the day, what determines if those inclinations are being useful or valuable, the users, not really much, right? And then I moved into Compass, and I actually have the first sort of like the first faceplate here. But this one, you can't really see the
it's a bit hard to see. I'm just seeing a black screen.
Yeah, so this was like the first sort of prototype. actually before that, I did like, proof of concept with this kind of PCB boards.
Mm-hmm.
And then, yeah, here's another one as well. And then this is the first, so like the first prototype unit sort of thing. And now you can see like the hexagons here
Yeah.
with, they have a layout. It's acrylic at the back. I'm not
Cool.
really.
Beautiful.
Yeah, I mean, it looks good. I'm not really convinced about the quality of it, but it's something that I have to keep working on. And yeah, so this was like my first approach to doing UX for a synth. Like, and really thinking about, putting all of the knobs over here so they don't get in the way when you play. These two buttons down here and the cables up here, so they're not sort of like in the way of your hand when you play. And the note arrangement is like the main idea I wanted to pursue with the design. I can't really remember the scale exactly. I mean, you can change the scale in the firmware, right? It's got a little MCU, but I think it's on an E minor scale. So so you have those steps there, and I wanted to put more keys into it, but the sensor chip that I was using or that I'm using design only allows for this number of keys. So I'll need to do some multiplexing and all of that. So I thought I'll keep myself within those boundaries and then try and finish the design. Yeah, the constraints. Otherwise, I mean, it can go forever, like.
Of course.
And that's something that I've learned in the process, that it just goes forever, and it's just really, it's endless, and it's very frustrating at the end of the day. And one thing that I want to mention is that the faceplate is made out of FR4, which is the same material that PCBs are made from.
Yeah.
And I really like this material because it's really cheap, and it also allows for doing transparencies on it. So yeah. I'm not sure if you can really see it, but like the LEDs, they don't really come out of the faceplate. It's just like a little window there with a transparency, and then I place like a really ultra bright LED down, and then you can see it through with no problem. So it looks really cool. Like it looks really minimalistic, really like smooth, and I really liked it. So
yeah, do you produce them? Do you produce them in Mexico?
Yeah, I do. I mean, some of these things I produce here in the city, and some others I have to go to another to the south of Mexico. It's just price point pretty much. So yeah, I try to keep stuff local. Obviously, components I do have to buy from Mauser, or maybe for prototypes I do Taida. That's trying to keep it as cheap as possible. And so yeah, that's Compass pretty much. I mean, I did sell like 10 units of this, and it's very simple. It's a very simple sort of synth. It's based on another pre-existing synth, Creative Commons design. So this is I published this as Creative Commons as well on my website, so anyone can just come into it and just build it pretty much. But yeah, I mean, what I wanted to do was exploring the interface aspects of a synth and trying to like figuring out new ways of placing keys. And I have a really good friend who's a jazz player. She plays piano, so we spent hours talking about scales and why the piano is arranged in that way. And it's really not a very well, as I understood it, it's not a very ergonomic design per se. It's just the way it was designed originally, and then trying to think about that idea and how to innovate on that idea on note placement and making that note placement a bit more obvious, and then placing like the notes from the lower pitch over here and then from the higher pitch over here, so you have that sort of sense like it goes from low to high sort of thing, right? So yeah, that was like the main idea, and I'm happy with the results, but I want to take it further and adding more functions to it and that sort of thing, make it more useful,
Yeah,
perhaps.
so I know that you also have background in user experience in general, in like digital design, product design.
Not really. I mean, not really in digital products, more in like physical product development. I did work for a small product development firm here in Mexico.
Okay.
But yeah, my background is in sound engineering, and so I come from the electronics. So like, yeah, like the electronics background.
I remember that you mentioned something about experience in user experience.
Oh yeah, like I'm just I suppose I want to learn more from it, so I'm starting like reading about it and just understanding more about
Mhm.
those aspects. And I do work for a software company, and we have that UX
Yeah.
components. Yeah.
So
So
so so you're basically working agile, and then on your synths as well, you're trying to work agile. So how
yes.
what is really the difference between working waterfall into agile when you're building something like a synthesizer?
I think the main difference is having more achievable and tangible results in less time. So to use Compass as an example, as I was saying before, I was telling you how this could go for forever if I was to place some multiplexers and increasing the size of these and all that, right?
Mm-hmm.
So having an agile approach and working in small iterations, what really does is that it allows for like a smaller sprint, sort of like design sprint process where it allows for just trying out a small idea
Mm-hmm.
and then testing that idea with a user, right? So say for this board, I tested like the idea of having the touch plate arranged in this way, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then I tested this with a user. So it's not really like a pretty prototype, but it's
Mm-hmm.
more like a functional prototype. Oops.
Yeah.
So then I tested this with a user, with my friend, and she used it and say, oh, it's pretty cool, but it's not the best arrangement that I could hope for. So then we started discussing about different ideas on how to arrange the keys, right, or the touch plates.
Mm-hmm.
And then we came up with this sort of arrangement. So I think the main difference will be that imagine that I just follow my idea endlessly without really testing that idea with a user, and then maybe the final design will have these sort of like configuration on the keys.
Mm-hmm.
And then when you present that to someone else, they'll say the same thing, right? They'll say, oh, it's pretty cool, but I don't really like how the notes are arranged. Can you change that? And then by that point, you already have like, I don't know, 10, 20, 50 units. And, it's really hard to solve them because
Yeah.
people really
And
like
months of
them.
work behind you, so it gets really frustrating
Exactly.
to
Yeah.
also make
Yeah,
such changes.
exactly.
Yeah.
So this way you get to like test it out. And, I'll share my screen.
Yeah, go ahead.
Give me one sec. So here's like a photo of like the first sort of approach, right?
Mm.
So you see the Arduino and the sensors and all that, and then pretty much presented that to my friend, and then just used it pretty much. And before then, it was just like that, just like
Yeah.
copper tape with wires, and
So this
then
was
that
sort
was
of like a layout of a piano in a
yeah,
sense.
exactly. That's
Yeah.
like the first this and this is just to try if the sensors will work with the Arduino latency, you name it, latency. If you press two of them, what happens? If it's really stable, if you need to change things. There's also a backdraw here,
Yeah. Cool.
which is just a LED to a photo resistance.
Mm-hmm.
And this is, I should say, this is from the original design. But
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to try this casing around it is 3D printed.
Mm.
So I wanted to try that sort of casing and see if that really changed the sound or not. So that's like the first approach. And then moving on to this one and trying it out again, and then having a user tested. And then if they, as I said, didn't like the arrangement, and then moving on to a different idea. And I'll just scroll back a little bit, and this is like the first sort of ideas just on paper, right? And just discussing ideas and talking about scales with my friend. And basically what she was saying is that this section of the keyboard will give you a Dorian sort of like sound, like a Dorian scale. And then if you played from here, from this section to the next one, it'll give you Lydian and then Phrygian at the end, right? And then you'll have the entire octave here arranged by pitch. So that was an interesting idea, and it comes from someone who has a musical mindset, right? So I'm not really a musician, so I only think about technology and electronics, and now I'm starting to think about UX experience and all of that. But my musicianship is poor, to say the least, right? So having that input from someone, yeah.
But hold on, you did have background in music,
audio engineering, yeah.
Right.
I mean, I don't really play an instrument. I know how to record and produce music, but
right.
I mean, having that sort of like artistic musician mindset, I think it's very different from my musician technical mindset, if that makes sense.
That's very interesting to say, because I think that a lot of people don't really see it that way.
Yeah, perhaps.
So like a producer is like, well, I'm a musician, and it's true because they are making music, and I would say that anyone that is making music professionally can call themselves a musician. But then if you're creating an instrument that's supposed to be played as a keyboard, as a piano sort of thing, then it's a bit hard to say that you can actually evaluate that experience if you're a producer that doesn't really know how to play a piano or a guitar. That layout that you showed there, for me, my origin, my beginning was in guitar. So when I look at this right away, it feels like, oh yeah, it's like frets, but only like 2 strings, sort of. And they're tuned to a certain scale. So it's very intuitive. And I think that also what you mentioned about the piano and the way that it was designed, I think it had to do with the fact that there was a constraint to the fact that physically this needs to be connected to strings.
Yes.
So there is literally no other way, or maybe like that's probably one of the best ways of doing it. And it's very visually clear for a composer to know where they are on the piano.
Yes, correct. Yeah, exactly. I think that's where like the value of testing ideas with the end user comes from. Like, I mean, I understand music, right? I like music, and I do this because I love music. But I think having to play an instrument to create music that it's inspiring to others and that it's nice to hear, and masterpieces in music, it requires a very different mindset and a very different formation, right? So this is where I believe that having that input from someone who will be using this to make music, it's really valuable, right? Because they will be, saying, oh, having this arrangement makes more sense musically, because they might have a certain bias, a certain mental model that they're used to. As you said just now, like, it makes sense because it reminds me of frets, and it's just, so as an user, that'll give you like an easier experience to use the synth, because you'll say, oh yeah, I can understand this. I don't have to spend hours reading a manual. I can just understand what each note is and then start experimenting. And that's what I'm trying to achieve in the designs, that you put out something that looks nice and sounds nice, but also has to, it has to offer this experience of, oh yeah, I can just plug this in and start playing and experimenting, and then having that learning curve very shortly, and then move on to experimenting and making music. So I think that was the logic behind it, I suppose.
That is definitely logical. If I'm looking at the features you have there, you have a bunch of sockets and 3 knobs. So what do
Oh
each of
yeah,
these do?
yeah. I'll try and find another
I
photo.
think you had a couple of photos there of the final.
Yeah,
Yeah,
so this is like 3D. Well, not 3D. Sorry, like a
maybe
2D.
zoom in. That's easier.
Yeah.
Yeah, perfect.
So over here, I mean, as I said, this is based on a synth called can't remember the name of the synth, but it's from Dr. Bleep.
Okay.
He's a guy from Austin, Texas, and he gives out workshops, and I really like his work because he did a lot of really interesting stuff synth-wise with the MCU from the Arduinos, and I thought that was genius. So I use like similar features and changed the design around, and then it was just a way of trying this idea in a faster way, right? Using that that sort of the opportunity of using Creative Commons for these sort of purposes, right?
Yeah.
So you have different arpeggiator styles over here. Inputs, you have sync in and sync out, so you can sync the synth with another clock, or maybe use the synth for as a master clock, and you change that with the switch that is placed over here. And then you have the different arpeggiator styles. So basically just like an octave, or maybe just going upwards, downwards, random. And then it also gives you the option to record your own sequence, right? So you record the sequence and then you play it. You play it back automatically with the synth. Then we have the LFO over here. So as I was saying before, the LFO has a backdraw. Its backdraw control is like a filter. So it gives you that sort of modulation with a light emitting diode and a photoresistor. So different styles for this, and then you see the LED over here for the ARP and for the LFO, right? So you see it reflected.
And the LFO is controlling the amplitude.
Yes, correct. It's more like a LFO BCA sort of thing, and it gives you that that style. And then you have different waveforms over here, which this is what I find most genius about Dr. Bleep's work with the Arduinos, because it's just amazing. What it's a bit of like a lo-fi sound, but it doesn't really, I mean, it sounds interesting. It doesn't sound cheap. It sounds pretty cool in my opinion. And then you have glide options for the keys, and you can shift the octave if I'm not mistaken, if I remember correctly, 3 octaves up and 3 octaves down. So yeah, that's pretty much like the main functions of the synth.
And these functions, they come from his work, or did you add any functionality to it?
No, they pretty much come from his work. Like it's basically the same sound engine from his design.
Do you want to maybe do you want to maybe show his design?
Yeah, sure. Let me just, I'll find it on another screen and then show you that.
Okay. I think that's really interesting to take something. I wish more people would do that, to design something that looks really professional and designed based on conversations with musicians that are going to be playing it. And yeah, in terms of functionality, it's basically the same function. It's just a matter of how it's being organized in front of you, the form factor of it, and the way that people can actually interact with the interface.
Yes. You know, as I was saying, for me, this was a way of trying to experiment with the UX or the design, the user-centric design aspects of making something, right? So the original design is from Bleep Labs, Dr. Bleep. It's the Nebula Phone, which is a pretty cool little synth, and it runs on an Arduino Uno, I think it is. But the keys, you see the Bactrol here, and then the keyboard is more about closing a circuit with a alligator hook, right?
Yeah.
A few videos here, and it's pretty cool. And then you can actually like communicate a bunch of them in cascade sort of thing, like waterfall, and it sounds pretty cool. I mean, I really love the design, and I actually wrote to I pay my respects to him, right? And I say, hey, look, I'm working on this, and here's what I'm thinking of. What do you think? Yeah, right? And yeah, we just bounced a couple ideas, so maybe he gave me feedback on that, and yeah, I mean, so it was an interesting exercise to like go from here, and that's what I love about Creative Commons, right? You can share your work. I mean, as I said, Compass is up there on the cloud, and then you can just download the files, the code, and see how it's done and program, and then you can take that idea one step ahead, right? One step further. And same thing with the Nebula Phone, right? So it started with this idea, which is pretty cool, and then someone else will come and say, "Oh, I really like it, but I wonder if this will work with this other idea I have for a user interface or for a touch plate." And then you start playing around with that, and then you end up with a different product. And then, it's like the collective creativity of people that are interested in these kind of things. And there's a lot of projects that work this way, right? And at first, for me personally, it was a bit of a hard idea to come around to. Like, I thought, if I'm doing things, I have to start from scratch all the way, and I can't just copy and paste something. But the more I did it, the more I realized that creativity is just like that, right? It's like recycling ideas, and innovating is about recycling those ideas and taking one step ahead and trying to really, really, better your last idea to have a better idea for the next one, and that's how it goes. I think that's how you sort of like reach the level of mastery, if for lack of a better term, in whatever discipline, right?
Yeah, I completely agree. I think that otherwise you might find yourself building like op amps because I could like say, someone designed these op amps and I cannot use them because it's designed by someone else. I need to start from scratch.
Yeah, right. Like I have to, here's some silicon. I have to make a transistor out of this, and that's exactly right. I mean, it's all about the collective effort, right? So,
for the people who don't really know, or maybe concerned or afraid of going into this world of like sharing their knowledge or taking someone else's knowledge, designing something from it and selling it, are there like rules for this world for someone who's just starting out?
Yeah, I mean, you can check out the Creative Commons licenses. There's different licenses, right? So you'll have the Creative Commons with different rules or subset of rules depending on the license. I mean, I personally, I would recommend anyone starting to this to really go into the website and read it out, and not just take my word as the last word of on the topic. But you have like the option of sharing your work with non-commercial possibilities. So I mean, you can sell it. I mean, you can use it for whatever you want, but not for commercial purposes. Or you have the Creative Commons license with the commercial possibilities. So you can resell the product even, or you can make changes to the product, but you have to like source the original author, like just name it or give that information out to the public, and then you can sell your own product based on that technology. Mutable Instruments, for instance, is very famous for doing that.
A lot of Behringer taking their work and making
exactly. I mean, that's like a very different conversation, right? Because you have this Creative Commons license that really allows for people like you and I to experiment and put out ideas and work in a boutique sort of smaller scale without the resources of a big corporation. And then suddenly you have a big corporation coming in and just have it, and it's just like defeats the purpose of it, in my opinion. But it's just how it is, I suppose. So, yeah.
It's weird. We're living in a very weird situation that things like this happen. But yeah, let's talk about some other projects. Like, what are you? So before you worked on this, you mentioned there was another project. I forgot the name.
Yeah, Frankie.
Frankie. Yeah.
So that was my first synth out there, and I'm actually. I mean, I'm not. I look at it and I think that it's not very nice, I think of like, oh, that's really, I'm ashamed of what I did with that synth, but I suppose it's part of the process. So I'll share some pictures.
I would love that. I think that anyone who is just starting out, and these conversations are basically for people who are like 20-year-olds or even younger, and like they want to explore, or they have no idea they could even start. Mm-hmm. And it's interesting to see how things actually start before they look so cool.
Yeah, so this is it. This is Frankie. I don't know if you can see it. I'll try.
Yeah, you can zoom in probably a bit. Yeah, but that's good. That's fine.
Okay.
Yeah.
So Frankie, it started out with, I was just experimenting with basic oscillators and a very basic filter, and then I saw someone on YouTube doing something similar, and then I wonder if I could integrate a little sequencer into it and what else I could do with that idea. And it's really basic. It runs off a 9-volt battery. Mm-hmm. So I started working on it, and then I name it Frankie because it's based on Frankenstein, because it's just out of the open, and it was like the first sort of synth that I was making, and the first synth that I decided to put out there. Mm-hmm. As a brand, as Bocuma. And it just I used to assemble them myself and then sell them out. Mm-hmm. But then it started like just being too much, and then I used to pay someone else to assemble them, and then people started asking them as a kit form, right? And then so today it's sold as a kit, as DIY kit. Mm-hmm. So you have all the instructions for the assembly, you receive all the parts, and then you assemble it. So it's very beginner friendly. It runs from a battery. It has this design at the back, just around the idea of Frankenstein again. And yeah, it's pretty much like 8 sort of notes over here. It's a square wave oscillator, and it's got a small sequencer. Mm-hmm. And the way it works is that depending on the combination that you place on this dip switch, it'll create random sequences. Mm-hmm. So it's not really linear per se. It's not that you switch the steps in a traditional sequencer mm-hmm. way, but it's more about experimenting and seeing how it sounds. And then, so that was the idea behind it, just inviting people to play with it and find out the possibilities of a DIY synth, right? And then the other thing, it has a filter, a low pass filter that is controlled by photoresistors. So you put your hand over it and it changes the sound. So that makes it very interactive, and I think that's what people likes about it. Like, it's just, you create a random sequence and then just start playing with your hand, and then suddenly you have crazy sounds coming out of something that you built. Yeah. And for me personally, that's a very interesting experience, because I love doing this, and I love assembling things that make noise, my own instruments or my own scenes or whatever. So this is a very introductory sort of like kit for doing that.
Mm-hmm.
Design wise is I would say is poorly designed. It's probably wrong that I say this out of the open, but yeah, it's just like using very like a lot of automation in the routing of the PCB, and but it works. I mean, it doesn't really affect the functioning of the synth, and that's one of the other advantages of doing agile in these kind of things. Like when you're doing iterations, what you're concerned about is about delivering value to your user. It's not really about having the masterpiece of super engineering that it's all flawless and it's all fail proof and all that. I mean, when and we can talk a little bit more about the process of prototyping and all that in a moment if you want, but like it's not really, that's not the objective of making a synth. It's more about making something that sounds good and looks good and works. So sometimes that means plugging things the opposite way, because that's the way the design is asking you to do it, right? And the other thing that I find that people in this sort of like niche find very convenient or very fun about it is that when you have instruments that sometimes they malfunction, they actually function better in a musical sense, right? So they like it because of those happy surprises.
Yeah.
And that happens a lot with Frankie, like with the sequencer, because it's not very precise in the way the steps are being played. It allows for a lot of really happy accidents and a lot of the machine just making its own sounds, and so like being alive, if I may
Yeah.
continue with the entire Frankenstein.
Yeah, it seems like
original.
it's I didn't play it, but I from what I understand, it's like it's that instrument that would surprise you.
Yes, correct. Yeah, and then when you plug it in and then you make it work, like it really growls, like it like the oscillator is really really crunchy, right? And
Yeah.
and then you think about it and go like, whoa, this is coming from a 9-volt battery and something that I put together in a couple of hours, and it's very fascinating, I think. So yeah, that's Frankie.
So
So yeah,
so
this is the
if
website.
we're looking at this, there are a bunch of features here that you mentioned. Were there
Mhm.
features that did not exist in the first iteration?
Yeah, the sequencer mainly. I spent a lot of time with the sequencer. It wasn't there in the first iteration. Also the filter, and I'm actually thinking of reworking this because and that's the thing, right? Like again, this could go forever, but at the end of the day, the goal of doing this personally with my project of Bocuma Synth is it's a business project, right? It's selling products for a certain niche. So if this was a hobby, it could go forever, and that's pretty cool, right? I'll have a lot of fun. But at the end of the day, if this is not really making revenue, it's not really working from that business side of things. So at the time that I was designing this synth, I was working at a small product development firm, and the director Adolfo from that firm, he was my mentor, and he was teaching me like a lot of stuff about product development and manufacturing a product for profit. I started learning about lean processes, agile, and all of that.
Mm-hmm.
So I will come up with a design, and I will tell him, oh, this is the design, but I think I can still make it run with a clock, outside clock. So I can add this feature, add this other feature, and all that. And it came to the point that he said, you know what, those are really great ideas, but you really need an MVP, and you really need to put this out like yesterday, right?
Mm-hmm.
And he said something like, and this is not from like, he read it somewhere, and he was telling me, if your first product in the market doesn't make you feel a little bit ashamed, you are doing it wrong, right?
Yeah. That's a quote. I
So
don't know who's the quote from, but yeah, I know this quote.
yeah, yeah, I can't remember who the quote is from either, but that was I mean, that's like the philosophy behind lean product development in my understanding, right? It's about creating value as fast as possible, but really delivering that value to the user. So what I did, I invited a lot of people to come into the office and test it out, and I gave them a free beer.
Mhm.
And then I have them test out the first prototype, and they liked it. And I asked them quite openly, will you buy this? Will you pay certain amount of Mexican pesos for this? And they say, yeah, man, like, do you have them available? I want one, like, right now, right? So that was a big teaching for me, right? Like, I don't really need to have like a perfect product, because that's my idea of perfect, right? But if you
Yeah.
put it out there, people will like it and people will just buy it, and then you expand on the idea. So I'm thinking of like revisiting this design and then placing more features into it, and then maybe having a second version of Frankie, right? Like Frankie Mark II, whatever. Same with Compass, having Compass with CV control and,
Yeah.
you know, uh, bigger interfaces. I don't know.
I completely agree with you on the lean and agile approach, and also the idea of, like, when I talk to designers, many of them, even if they have like large companies, they really, it's like you're talking to an artist. It's like, I'm making this for myself. If people are going to enjoy it, that's awesome, but if not, you know.
That's
um
their problem. Yeah.
the thing is that when you start thinking in a more agile way, then you're able to invest, you're able to introduce new innovation and more innovation, simply because of the approach, because you're not diving into detail too much. You are
Correct.
delivering something that works and it's fun, and this is what I have at the moment, and I can keep working on it. But while I'm working on it, I can already release it to the world so they can play with it. I can get some revenue from it so I can develop my new project. And
Correct.
like this,
Yes.
you can create, you can accelerate your development process, and you can create things that are really inspiring and like really push the boundaries, simply because today things are possible. In the 80s, it might have been much harder to do stuff like this, because we would just not have the materials to do it. And now, because you can actually print a PCB around the corner and create some things, then just show it to a few people online, and they're like, oh, I would buy this, and then you sell it, then at a certain point you can create a very, very small local business that can create original projects, just because you're working in a more agile way. While if you like really try to figure out all the details at once, you might spend 2 years on a project and not release anything, and that's a loss, I think.
Correct. Yeah. And, you know, it's funny that you mentioned that, because one thing that I should say about Frankie is that it came out that way because I needed money to fund my other ideas and projects. So I thought, oh well, I can manufacture Frankies and I can sell them out, and then I can start making revenue so I can work on more interesting projects, right? Like more real projects. I used to think that way. And
Yeah.
then once I was working on those projects, I found myself like having to deal with Frankie most of the time. So I like thought, maybe I should discontinue Frankie and then introduce new products and then make people forget about Frankie, sort of thing.
Mm-mm.
But it just didn't happen. I mean, at the end of the day, it's people, it's the market or the user that says, hey, I like it. Where's Frankie? I want to assemble one. I want. So that gives you a lot of insight into what people are really into.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I'm finding out that each day more and more people are into DIY and assembling things and
Mm-hmm.
learning about electronics. A lot of people ask about workshops, for instance. So I've used Frankie as a workshop platform as well. So So now you have a product that is so like giving you different revenue streams, right? Like workshops, the product per se, assembled product, it might come with an assembly fee or you name it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, and then you can move on to like new projects that you might be interested in, like the modular things that I'm working on right now, because people are so like looking for that. And then it's giving me the chance to learn about new technologies and new ways of doing things, or maybe not even new things, you know, just how oscillators work,
Yeah.
and then innovating on those ideas and putting out different products, you know, for people to try out. And then I think it's fun. I mean, it's a lot of fun working in that sort of like rhythm, in that agile really asks you to like, you really need to be agile, but you know, I think that's what it's
Yeah.
called. And so I've learned about it in that product development firm, and then I move on to a software industry. So it's a bit different, but the approach is the same. It's value and user centric. So I think having that sort of approach or mentality to the projects, it also gives it like a good channel to output those ideas, because yeah, as I say, you can spend months on a project and you can lose yourself in a design, and if it's not really going somewhere, then in a way you're wasting your time, right?
Yeah.
um
Yeah, I agree.
and that's why that's what I learned from that experience of working on a product development firm, and having someone telling me, okay, that's pretty cool what you're doing, you're a pretty good engineer if you want to hear that, but
Mm-hmm.
you're a terrible businessman, right? So this is just not going to work. You have to start thinking this other way if you want to achieve those things. But if you want to be an artist, and if you want to put out designs for people to use them if they like them, that's fine too. You know, it all depends on your sort of approach and intention of doing a
But also
project.
but also as an artist, it's important to understand that if you're making your art, bottom line, you actually want people to
Yeah.
see it, to experience it. You're not just doing things solely for yourself. You're not like an egocentric person. You just happen to be creative and you want to output something to the world. And if that
Correct.
output needs to get to people, then you need to understand how to get it to people. That's just part of it. It's not
Yes.
like the yeah, there is a very intricate balance between just doing things for yourself, and it can be that you're just doing engineering. It has nothing to do with art either, but you're just like, I'm making my own thing and that's it. It's only for myself, and that's cool. But
Yep.
then if you're calling yourself an artist and you're or an engineer, and there is a mission behind this, like you have a statement as an artist, you're trying to reflect on society, on, I don't know, things in politics, or whatever, global warming, and you make something, it's not for yourself. This is for other people to be affected by.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And when you work in such mentality that, like, you understand, okay, I need to deliver on a deadline, some people might look at it as like, yeah, you're basically cutting my wings, I don't have my freedom anymore. I say, well, you just become a professional artist. You don't
Yes.
expect, like, when Radiohead releases an album, yeah, maybe now it's different, but when they just left the label and started working for themselves, they were working with deadlines, with like the manager and Tom York and Greenwood are like figuring out what is okay, so when do we release this? This is a business. Of course it's super
Yes.
creative and like pushing the boundaries completely, but
Hmm.
it's not like I'm making stuff for myself, I'm just singing for myself.
Yes, correct.
Yeah.
That's exactly right. Like, it's for me, it's finding the equilibrium and making it work,
Yeah.
because I mean, this is not my full-time job, but I know a lot of people who, you know, started making these kind of things, and then suddenly it's their full-time job, because
Oh yeah.
you make it work. And you have to think that way, that you need to pay, you have bills to pay, so you make it work, and you make it go that way. And So yeah, I think agile, having that sort of agile approach and understanding how to channel creativity into results, it's very important in these sort of efforts, because especially for myself, because I find that I am very dispersed with my interests at some point, and then I can change directions very quickly, and at sometimes it's just not the best way to go. As I was saying with the oscillator, right? Like redesigning a VCO because I want to learn the like from scratch what it takes to build a really stable, nice sounding oscillator with
Yeah.
cool features. In the short term, it might not be the best approach because it's going to take me a while until I have a finished product. But in the long time, I feel that it's going to be like a better design by the end of it. But I think at this point, I kind of have the luxury of time because I have Frankie that is so it sells pretty well, and I have another like a BCF coming out probably at the end of the month. So that's it so like gets the ball rolling slowly, and then I can relax a little bit with this kind of thing.
Yeah.
But when I originally designed the VCO, it was more about, okay, I'm gonna make a VCO, but I need to make it quick. So I decided to go with pre-made chips,
3340.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah, the 3340, which is it's a pretty cool chip. I mean, it nothing wrong with it. It's just from my point of view, I like it to be different in my design, right? So
Yeah, I
maybe
get
it's
it.
not
It almost seems like the other projects allow you to now do some more research and to spend more
correct.
time on research and development. So you'll be able to create something, um, yeah, more specific that you're not really sure exactly how it's going to turn out. Like this is
Yes,
probably not really very agile in that sense.
yes, yeah. In that sense, it might not be, but when you think about it in the sense of having modules, it's agile in a way because you design, say, a VCO, and then you put out the VCO, and it's giving you revenue, or it's putting the brand out there,
Mhm.
and then you move on to a VCF, and then it does the same thing, and then sample and hold. And at the end of that process, you pretty much have all of the elements to create a desktop synth, which is my idea down the run.
Yeah.
So it's like, all right, I'm creating this desktop synth that I have in my mind with a user-centric approach. But while doing that, I'm able to sell these small chunks of that same
Right.
product. So I don't know if it's going to work. I mean, it's an interesting idea to explore, and I think that's what is like my motivation, or what gets me going, is having that interesting idea to explore and see if it works, or if it doesn't. Well, it's just how it is, you know.
Yeah, I think it's quite challenging and very ambitious to work to build now a standalone analog complete
Yes.
synthesizer. So by saying, okay, I'm just going to build now a VCO, and then I'm going to build a VCA or a VCF. I'm going to add a little mixer, and slowly I am basically building the whole thing, but I'm not setting myself to now finish a complete, I don't know, an Arturia mini brute in like
Yeah,
one
right.
go. That's just, I mean, it would be amazing to do that. But yeah, if you're just starting out and you're like learning your way through, then it's probably wiser to build like small components. And every time that you have one of these components, then you're sort of like incrementally getting to that point that you can actually create something that would be sort of like the mini brute.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And just to give or to add to that perspective, the idea with Compass, for instance, now that I understand more or less how technically these sensors work,
Hmm.
it'll be super easy to integrate this into another device that will connect to that synth, for instance, right? So you're sort of like creating that knowledge base for your brand and your work.
Hmm.
And it's very important to keep documentation on that. And then using that documentation to and it becomes faster, right? Like your time to market gets reduced every time
Yeah.
because you know how to do things. Like, oh, I remember this project that I did with Compass, and I remember what I learned from it, and I have it documented. Then I'm going to use that learning and that experience for this project, and then it's like putting this bit of work into this new bit of work. And the more you do it, the more body of knowledge you are creating for yourself, and then you get to output those ideas faster because you've done it in the past. And I think that's why it's very, very important to have that approach of doing MVPs and learning from that experience, trying to create revenue from those MVPs, but then allowing those MVPs to become something bigger each time. And at my scale, this is just like a one-man show, right? So I don't really have a lot of time or resources, so I move a little bit slower than the typical company will do, probably. But I believe that every time that I put out a product out there, it's something that I can be proud of, and it's something that I'm sure people will appreciate because it's coming from this philosophy of designing stuff from someone else and really having that technical expertise in putting those products out there. And that, I think it gives the brand a little bit of added value, right? It's like people in Mexico, I think they start to, the way I see it is they start to see Bocuma as a Mexican synth brand that is putting stuff out there, but it's not necessarily the consumer brand that is putting stuff every month, right? It's like every certain amount of time something comes out of the brand, but it's something that it's unique. It's something that I'm gonna like because it's been tested. It's been tried and tested with users, and it's gone through that approach. And then once you reach market, you have a bigger certainty that it's going to be accepted with a bunch of users. So I mean, it's all about design thinking and agile mindset and putting the user in the middle and involving the user in the process of creating new projects and new products. So I mean, it's not that I'm at the pinnacle of things at the moment. It's something that's still going on, and I think that's how it's going to be. But as I said, that's what really gets me going. It's like the process of trying it out and seeing if it happens. If it's not happening, then changing directions and all of that. So I think that's a big advantage of being like a small company or a one-man show or whatever. You have the luxury of changing direction pretty quickly, and very lean in resources, just having what you need and using that, doing your best with what you have, and then trying it out. And that's a lot of fun. I think that's a lot of fun.